He thought the hardest day of his life was the night he lost his wife, until the moment a supermarket full of strangers turned against him. A single dad, clutching his baby's hand, humiliated at the checkout as the cashier's cold words cut deeper than any wound. Declined. Laughter, whispers, and cruel stares closed in, crushing what little dignity he had left. Just as despair threatened to break him, a woman no one expected, a powerful millionaire CEO, stepped forward. But her eyes weren't filled with pity. They carried a secret, one tied to his past in ways he never imagined. What happened next would change everything. The supermarket lights glared too brightly, casting harsh shadows on Daniel's weary face as he held his daughter close. His hands, still faintly stained with grease from fixing an old engine earlier that day, trembled as he placed a carton of milk, diapers, and a loaf of bread onto the conveyor belt. The smell of baby soap clung faintly to his shirt, a contrast to the scent of oil and metal embedded in his skin. He whispered softly to his baby girl, Emma, whose tiny fingers clutched at the faded bracelet her mother once gave her, as if that little piece of silver was a lifeline to the world they had lost. When the cashier slid his card and shook her head, Daniel's chest tightened. "I'm sorry, sir." "Declined." The words rang out louder than the buzzing fluorescent lights. A hush fell over the line behind him, before it quickly turned into cruel murmurs. "Maybe he should get a real job," one customer sneered. Another muttered, "If you can't afford to raise a child, don't have one." The sting of humiliation made his throat burn. He felt the same suffocating shame that had swallowed him on the night his wife died, when the hospital clerk demanded payment before treatment, and he stood there, powerless, watching the life drain from her eyes. Emma let out a whimper that cracked into a cry, her small voice echoing across the checkout lanes. The sound was piercing, a child's helpless protest against a world that had already taken too much from her. Daniel tried to hush her, pressing his lips to her forehead, but his own tears threatened to spill. A security guard approached, his tone cold, almost rehearsed. "Sir, if you can't pay, you'll need to step aside." The guard's hand hovered near his arm, as if he were about to drag him out, a gesture that stabbed at Daniel's dignity. Emma's bracelet gleamed under the fluorescent light, the same bracelet her mother had slipped around her tiny wrist the night she was born. It was the last thing she ever touched before leaving this world. Daniel saw it now as both a blessing and a curse, a reminder of everything he had lost, yet everything he must protect. Just as he was about to scoop up his groceries and retreat in defeat, a voice cut through the air, firm, commanding, yet unexpectedly gentle. "That won't be necessary." The crowd turned. A woman stepped forward, her presence commanding attention like the sudden hush before a storm. She wore an elegant navy suit, her heels clicking against the tiled floor with quiet authority. But it wasn't her wealth or her poise that made Daniel's breath catch. It was the way she looked at Emma, with something more than pity. Her gaze softened, trembled even, as though the sight of the child tore open an old wound she had tried for years to seal shut. Without hesitation, she slid her black card across the counter. "I'll take care of it," she said, her tone leaving no room for argument. The cashier, flustered, quickly swiped the card. The whispers around them shifted from mockery to shock, but Daniel barely heard them. He was too caught in the woman's eyes that shimmered with something he couldn't place. When she leaned closer to Emma, Daniel noticed her pupils dilate, her lips part slightly as if she recognized something. Then, almost imperceptibly, her gaze lingered on the faint scar that traced Emma's tiny wrist, right beneath the bracelet. The same scar that had puzzled doctors since her birth. The scar Daniel had always thought of as nothing more than a strange accident of fate. But in the woman's eyes, it wasn't just a scar. It was a revelation. For the briefest moment, her composure cracked, revealing a depth of sorrow and astonishment that made Daniel's pulse race. Who was she to look at his daughter that way? And why did it feel like she was staring at a ghost? The guard stepped back awkwardly, the tension dissolving into silence. Daniel clutched Emma tighter, torn between gratitude and suspicion, between relief and the unease of secrets he didn't yet understand. The woman straightened, regaining her composure, but the tremor in her voice betrayed her when she finally spoke to him directly. "You don't know me," she said softly, "but perhaps you should." Her words lingered in the sterile air of the supermarket, heavier than the shame, heavier than the cruelty of strangers. Daniel didn't know it yet, but this moment, the rejection, the scar, the sudden intervention of a millionaire CEO, wasn't a simple act of charity. It was the opening of a door he had never known existed, a door to truths buried deep in shadows, truths that could either heal his wounded heart or shatter what little strength he had left. Daniel couldn't shake the image of the woman's eyes lingering on Emma's wrist. That night, after he put his daughter to sleep in their small apartment, its air heavy with the faint scent of formula and the creak of old floorboards, he found himself replaying the moment over and over. Who was she? Why did her gaze carry both recognition and grief? The next morning, a sleek black car pulled up near his building, an odd contrast to the rusted bicycles and peeling paint of the neighborhood. The driver handed him a card embossed with silver lettering. Elizabeth Carter, CEO, Carter Enterprises. The invitation was simple yet commanding. "Please come to my office. We need to talk." Against his instincts, Daniel went. Her office on the top floor of a glass tower felt like a different world. The clean scent of fresh lilies arranged in crystal vases, the polished wood gleaming under soft light, the distant hum of the city below. Emma babbled softly in his arms, her voice echoing in the high-ceilinged room. Elizabeth greeted them, her professional smile faltering the moment she saw the child again. Daniel's eyes wandered to a framed photograph on her desk. His breath caught. The picture was old, faded slightly at the edges. It showed a younger Elizabeth standing beside a woman who looked hauntingly familiar. His chest tightened, the same sharp cheekbones, the same quiet eyes as his late wife, Sarah. For a moment he thought he was hallucinating. Elizabeth noticed his stare. "That's my younger sister," she whispered. She disappeared years ago." Daniel's knees weakened. He remembered the night Sarah had confided in him about cutting ties with her powerful family, about the secrets she had vowed never to reveal. Could this woman, this CEO, be part of the same story Sarah had run from? Elizabeth's hands trembled as she poured tea, her mask of composure cracking. She confessed her own trauma. Her father, once the head of the Carter Empire, had orchestrated cover-ups, silenced those who threatened his power, and left a trail of broken lives. One of those lives, she admitted with a trembling voice, might have been Sarah's. The weight of her words made Daniel's stomach twist. He wanted to protect Emma, to shield her from the darkness, but he also burned with the need to know the truth about the woman he had loved and lost. Elizabeth opened a drawer and slid a thick folder across the desk. Court documents, medical records, signed testimonies, evidence of a corruption case that had nearly destroyed her company, and that, if reopened, could unravel the truth about Sarah's death. "I can't do this alone," she said, her voice breaking. "But if we bring this forward, they'll come after you, after her." As if to punctuate her warning, Daniel noticed a shadow flicker outside the glass walls of the office, the silhouette of a man lingering longer than coincidence would allow. That night, back at his apartment, he found an envelope slipped under his door. Inside, a single sheet of paper with red ink scrawled across it. "Stay silent, or your daughter won't live to grow up." His hands shook as he clutched the note, his heart pounding in his ears. He looked at Emma sleeping peacefully, her tiny chest rising and falling, her fist still wrapped around the bracelet. The thought of losing her the way he lost Sarah was unbearable. Yet the folder Elizabeth had given him lay heavy on the table, its weight more than paper. It was a doorway to justice, to truth, but also to danger. A few nights later, Daniel was jolted awake by a loud crash. Someone had thrown a brick through his window. Attached was another note. "The courtroom is no place for a man with a baby. Walk away." He held Emma close, rocking her as the wind whistled through the broken glass. He knew then that silence would never keep them safe. The shadows would always find them unless he stood up and fought back. But could he? He was just a mechanic, a single father barely holding his life together. The idea of stepping into a courtroom against powerful men with limitless resources felt impossible. Yet when he remembered Sarah's lifeless hand slipping from his at the hospital, and Emma's cry the night at the supermarket, something hardened inside him. The bracelet glinted faintly in the moonlight, as if whispering that surrender was not an option. When Elizabeth came to see him the next day, she didn't need to ask for his decision. The resolve in his eyes told her everything. "Then we'll face them together," she said, placing her hand over his. But the tremor in her fingers betrayed her fear. Daniel understood now that he wasn't just fighting for Emma or Sarah's memory. He was entangled in a war that reached back into Elizabeth's family, into secrets soaked in greed and blood. The path ahead promised nothing but peril. Still, for the first time in years, Daniel felt something stir beyond his grief. The fire of defiance, the spark of justice. The courtroom was a cathedral of judgment, its wooden benches filled with strangers leaning forward, eager for spectacle. The smell of polished oak mixed with the faint tang of ink and paper, a blend that made Daniel's throat dry as he clutched Emma's tiny hand. The judge's gavel struck once, echoing like a thunderclap through his chest. Elizabeth sat beside him at the plaintiff's table, her navy suit crisp, but her fingers tapping nervously against a folder of evidence. She gave him a glance that was both reassuring and desperate, as if she drew as much courage from him as he did from her. When the opposing counsel began, their words were knives. A single father with no stable income, no credibility, and a tragic story that seems more convenient than true. The attorney's voice was sharp, each syllable slicing into Daniel's pride. They painted him as a man broken, unreliable, even dangerous to his own child. The weight of humiliation pressed down on him the way it had in the supermarket, the way it had in the hospital when Sarah slipped away. For a moment, his resolve wavered. He lowered his gaze, afraid Emma might see the defeat in his eyes. Then Elizabeth's hand brushed against his under the table, steady and firm. He looked up at her, and in her eyes he saw not pity, but belief. It was that silent faith that gave him the strength to rise when called to the witness stand. The courtroom lights burned hot on his skin. His voice shook as he recounted the night Sarah died, the denial of care without payment, the cold indifference of those who had the power to save her. He spoke of the threats, the notes left at his door, the brick through his window. Each word carried the rawness of years of silence breaking apart. The defense tried to twist his testimony, dragging out his debts, his failed jobs, his desperation. They wanted the jury to see a man weak and reckless. But then, Elizabeth's lawyer presented the twist. A video, long buried in sealed files, flickered to life on the screen. Grainy but damning, it showed Sarah in the hospital corridor, begging for help. Behind her, almost hidden in the frame, was the silhouette of one of Carter Enterprises' rivals, a man now sitting smugly at the defense table. Gasps rippled through the room. Daniel's hands clenched the wooden edge of the witness box until his knuckles turned white. His breath caught in his throat. The truth was no longer just suspicion. It was visible, undeniable. The man who had mocked him with silence, who had profited from his wife's death, now sat exposed under the harsh light of justice. Anger surged, but it was not wild. It was steady, controlled, like a fire carefully fed. He spoke again, this time not trembling. "I am not here for pity. I am here because my daughter deserves a world where truth matters, where power doesn't silence love." My wife's voice was stolen that night. Today I give it back. For a heartbeat, the room was utterly silent. Then Emma stirred in Elizabeth's lap, turning her head and for the first time in her short life, forming the word clearly, Daddy. The single word shattered Daniel's composure. Tears streamed down his face as he choked back a sob. It wasn't weakness. It was release, a river breaking its dam. The jury's eyes softened. The judge's expression steadied into gravity. When the verdict came, it rang like church bells. Guilty. The rival empire crumbled under the weight of truth. The air in the courtroom shifted from tension to awe, as though something greater than justice had unfolded. Daniel collapsed into his seat. Emma pressed against his chest, her warmth grounding him in the moment. Elizabeth placed her hand firmly on his shoulder, her touch a vow without words. Outside the courthouse, sunlight spilled through drifting petals from a cherry tree nearby, a bloom arriving late in the season. One petal landed in Emma's small hand, her bracelet catching the light. Daniel stared at it, the symbol of Sarah's love intertwined with the promise of healing. For the first time since her death, he allowed himself to breathe without guilt. He was no longer just a single father fighting shadows. He was a man who had carried pain through fire and emerged with truth in his hands and hope in his heart. Beside him, Elizabeth's gaze lingered, softer now, filled with both sorrow and something unspoken. They had faced the darkness together, and though the road ahead was uncertain, Daniel felt the faint stirrings of a new chapter. A chapter where his daughter would grow not under the weight of loss, but in the light of justice, resilience, and love. In the end, this was never just about a single dad at a checkout line. It was about resilience, truth, and the quiet strength of love that refuses to be silenced. Daniel's journey showed us how even in the darkest corners of humiliation and loss, the light of justice and compassion can break through. His courage, Elizabeth's faith, and little Emma's innocent voice reminded us that healing is possible, and that every act of standing up for what's right matters. If this story touched your heart, consider subscribing for more soul-stirring tales or sharing your own story of courage and hope, because together, our voices can inspire change.